Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff, and this show is designed to highlight philanthropic leaders here in the United States and then beyond. And with us today, we have a wonderful woman. Her name is Brenda Simmons. She's a local woman here on the eastern end of Long Island, and she happens to be the executive director of the Southampton African American Museum. She's an advocate, she's a mother, she's had a fascinating life. Let's all welcome Brenda Simmons. And Brenda, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm such an admirer of yours. And can you tell us, I want to hear first about your involvement with the museum. I understand this museum has been in the planning stages for quite some time. Is that correct?
That is correct, Jean. And first of all, again, thank you for inviting me here. Yes, you know, the museum is a very, very special place, and it's going to be a legacy left for the African American community. It used to be a barbershop back in the 40s, and a beautician and a juke joint.
You mean the actual physical structure?
The actual physical structure was built in 1940s by Emmanuel Seymour, the original owner. And back then, a black owner of a own business was really, really special. And he also built the building as well. So during this time, we decided to make it a museum. You know, Randy Conquest was the last barber who owned the barber shop, and he retired. And we went to the town and we said, look, we want to make this a museum. And they said, really? We said, yes. And so it's been 16 years in the process. It's been a lot of challenges, Jean.
And has it opened up yet? I don't think so, right?
It's not opened up yet. We've had a lot of little bumps and bruises along the way. We had a contract, unfortunately, who didn't do well. We had to take him off the project, and we had to have another contract bid to come on. But it's due to open.
Yes.
Drum roll. It's due to open the middle to the end of November this year.
2020.
2020.
Fabulous.
Yes.
I hope it happens.
Yes.
And
yes.
Where is it exactly?
It is located at 245 North Sea Road in Southampton.
Nice. So I've got to take a little ride and do a little exploring.
It's the entrance. It's the entrance
yes.
to the village. It's right there in the entrance of the village. It's right there.
And to really everyone here on the eastern end of Long Island. And Brenda, I understand you grew up here in Southampton. You were born here, you were raised here, and you continue to live here. I'm not asking, I don't want to know anything about age or that sort of thing.
I'm not ashamed to share
my
age.
No, you're a woman, we keep that private. But I do want to ask you, what was it like growing up here as a woman of color in Southampton?
You know,
Jean, be honest.
I'm going to be very honest, and I want to share, you know, specifically that it was a great migration. I know people know about the Great Migration, and my parents came from North Carolina and Virginia, I would say in the late 50s, early to late 50s.
So and before the Civil Rights Movement.
Yes, yes. And I have a quick story I can tell you about that, too, that I won't forget. And so I want to say that growing up here, my parents were very protective of us. And really, the story I'll share real quick is they never want us to go down Job's Lane. And I didn't understand why they didn't want us to go down Job's Lane.
Your parents didn't want you
My
to go.
My parents didn't want us to go down Job's Lane.
And did they never told you why?
They never told us why, because back then we obeyed our parents. So we didn't ask why, we just obeyed. But a quick story I'll share again is we were in high school, and I think I was a junior or sophomore in high school, and we did what teenagers do. We had a little stuff to drink, you know, being very honest, you said to be honest, and we decided we're going to drive down Job's Lane. Because what the heck? We're going to drive down Job's Lane.
Well, there wasn't a law that said you couldn't drive down Job's Lane.
It wasn't, but my parents, I felt like I was being rebellious to my parents, to be very honest with you.
I understand.
But we drove down Windmill Lane, people who are familiar with Southampton, we turned down Job's Lane, and I'm looking at these dummies in the window with nice clothes on. I'm like, what's the big deal? But we get to the end of Job's Lane to turn left to go down Main Street, and there was a white gentleman coming down, and he said, what are you ends doing here? And I don't know if you want me to say
terrible.
that word or not, but I have to, like I said, you want to be honest, shared with him that it was nice for him to say that to us, and that's all I'll say about that.
And was he just a regular citizen?
He was
Or
just
you
a
don't know who
regular
he
guy,
was?
just happened to be walking around, a white guy walking around. He saw us driving down. But at that moment,
terrible,
Jean,
terrible
But that
thing.
moment, Jean, I understood why now my parents didn't want us. They were protecting us. They were protecting us.
From people who were prejudicial towards
Absolutely, absolutely.
people of color.
Absolutely. And this is in Southampton. This was in Southampton in the 70s, early 70s.
Well, that's a terrible story.
Yeah.
And so what happened after that? Did you report it to your parents? Did you report it to the police?
Of course I couldn't report it to my parents because I was supposed to be down there.
Yeah.
But you know, I have to say, it was a reality check for me. You know, it really wasn't a reality check for me. But on another positive thing, while went to high school there.
You went to
I went to Southampton High School
Right.
as well. Like I said, born and raised in Southampton. And we had a sit-out because we wanted to have...
In the 70s.
In the 70s, we wanted to have a Black Studies class and a Black Studies teacher. Because
And
we
what
didn't have
happened?
it. We sat out, and we had other white people that sat out with us. We got the teacher, we got the class.
Well, that's a good story.
It's
That's
a
a
good-
wonderful thing.
Exactly,
Yes, so
exactly.
that back then, the town of Southampton paid attention.
Yes, they did. And I think that was because they had never expected us to do that. But it was during that time where it was the Black Power movement, you know,
Yes,
that was,
yep.
that, you know, I had the big, you know, Angela Davis afro and the whole nine, you know. But it wasn't it was just a sit-out, a quiet sit-out, but we got what we wanted.
And so you remain living in Southampton now?
I remain living in Southampton.
And you raised your children here?
Yes, I raised two beautiful girls here, and I have a home in Southampton as well. And it's, you know, with that too, I want to share that because of my experience and my parents saying that we shouldn't go down Job's Lane, I did the total opposite with my children.
You told them to go down Job's Lane.
I took them down there.
Good.
I took them down there. I want them to know that they're just as good as anybody else to walk down here.
Well,
you know?
absolutely.
And
now,
it was.
And I understand you've worked in local government for many, many years here on the eastern end of Long Island. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Of course.
Work
I
a little
was the
bit?
assistant to the mayor in the village of Southampton for 11 years.
It's a long time.
And that was a wonderful experience, but it was also interesting as well.
You learned a lot.
I learned a lot. You know, I also was the recording secretary as well. So I had like two hats. And I did recording the secretary for 2 meetings. They had 2 meetings. The Board of Trustees had 2 meetings. And I always said that I was taking minutes, but I was taking notes.
Of course.
Because I learned a lot about the political things and how things ran. But I want to tell you a funny story. I said I used to wish I had a camera in my office because I had my, you know, the name up there, assistant to the mayor. And people would come to my office, and I call it the 2-step. They would walk and step back, and they look at me, they look up at the sign, and some of them used to actually say, are you the assistant to the mayor? Because I was basically the first, I think one of the first Black people that they hired in the village
I would have
hall.
thought they'd walk in and say, "Are you the mayor?"
Well, I had that name after a while. I did have
I
that
bet,
name after
yes.
a while. So, you know.
And I remember reaching out to you when I wanted to interview the mayor for
Yes.
Social Life, where I write.
Yes, yes, yes. And you know, I always say to people, I treat people the way I want to be treated.
Absolutely.
So no matter how they wasn't sure who I was or how I had a red chair, I called it my conference chair, and I would sit down and guarantee before they left they were fine. And I might not be able to answer everything for them, but I'd always get back with them, and that's the way I flow.
Now, after high school, you went off to college right here on the eastern end of Long Island or elsewhere on Long Island?
I went to Suffolk. I was local because I was married.
Yes.
And I had children, so I had responsibilities at that time. I got married very young. I was 20 years old.
You were young.
I was very young. So I did go to school to Suffolk Community College locally. I got a degree in community. No, my first degree was computer information system. That was my first degree.
Well, that was a smart degree to get.
Yeah, it was. And I worked in that field, you know, did very well in that field. And prior to that, they had while I was in high school, they had the first BOCES class, vocational school.
Yes,
and
I
I went for
remember.
computers. And I was good at the programming, the RPG and all that kind of stuff, the programming and I was so good that I was sent up in competition upstate. And I came in 4th place. I missed 3rd place, but I came in 4th place. So that was my bent for a while until I decided to go into a different field.
And that was government.
That was government, but also it was community development, working with the community. So I have a community development degree with a concentration in advocacy.
Yes, you mentioned that you are an advocate.
Yes.
And I assume that you are an advocate for the rights of the people and for racial justice. But I want to hear from you. I'm not being interviewed, you're being interviewed. So tell me a little bit about your advocacy work.
My advocacy work has been a lot for young moms with children, but also I love teenagers because I feel like they get to that age where a lot of people just kind of shun them because they're in that challenging year.
Well, they're very young and they
think they know it all.
Developing.
And yes, but I love the teenagers. I love the teenagers, and I also dealt with a lot of young moms. But also, when I was working another non-for-profit at one point, and they had a lot of services that they offered. So I would come back to my community and make sure I offered those services to my community. And also, I was community leader in my neighborhood as well. So I had a lot of community meetings. I ran the community meetings, and I made sure people understood that it was important for us to be be at board meetings, be at town board meetings, village board meetings, and school board meetings. Because a lot of things happen that we were unaware of, a lot of things that we should be involved in, a lot of things that we should have our voice in.
As a concerned citizen and as someone living in Southampton,
Exactly.
Of course, I understand completely.
Exactly.
And so you did a lot of advocating for people of color in Southampton.
Absolutely.
And what about the Black Lives Matter movement? Are you involved there? And of course, it's very important. And to our viewers, I am interviewing Brenda Simmons. She is the Executive Director of the Southampton African American Museum. I'm learning, and we're all learning a little bit about her life and her advocacy work.
The Black Lives Matter, I have to say, I go away for the winter. I call it rejourning. In 2015, I rejourneyed, AKA retired, and I spend my winters in St. Martin. So I literally was in St. Martin when all of this was happening. So it was very challenging for me not to be here to see all that was going on. But it was also very interesting to hear the comments of the people in St. Martin about what was going on in the States.
And what were they saying?
A lot of them was very shocked, which I was surprised with. I'm like, I guess they felt that. I had one young lady said to me, she was in tears. She says, I really never knew that the racism was so bad there at that point, especially when George Floyd got I call it lynching.
Well, that was a terrible,
I call
terrible
it lynching.
thing.
That's what I call it. So to see that, they were very, to the point where I never forget, I was driving from, there's a French and a Dutch side in St. Martin. I was driving from the French side, going to the Dutch side, to Phillipsburg, and I'm driving down, and there was this woman that had Black Lives Matter poster outside. I mean, it was homemade and whatever. I stopped and turned around, I interviewed her, I had a picture with her. So it was really wonderful to know that other people were behind us, like we knew the whole world is now behind the Black Lives Matter.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. And I think that racial justice has to happen. It has to happen now, not 10 years from now, but now. And getting back to the museum, though, because I want to hear a little bit more. Where does the funding come from, and are you in need of more funding? I went to the website, and I didn't see too much there, and I want you to explain to our audience how they can help and also where this funding is coming from, because I think it's very important. It's not a massive museum.
Right.
And it's part of the culture of Southampton.
Absolutely.
I understand the first Black man came to Southampton in something like 1600, correct?
Yes, Pierce Conser.
Yes,
former slave.
But let's talk about the funding,
museum.
and then let's talk about the history of Black people in Southampton.
Okay. The funding comes, the building was purchased by the town's Community Preservation Fund.
Okay.
And it is located on village property.
Okay.
So the village and the town have an agreement, IMA agreement, and we are going to run it. That's how that works. So the majority of the money came from the town. And during this process, you know, when it's being built, the community preservation don't cover everything. So we were responsible for about $100,000, which we did not have. And I give Assembly Fred Thiel, he's like, I don't know what other word to say. I call him my boo, you know, that's what I call him as fondly, you know, but respectfully, he has been in my corner the whole time. So I happened to meet with him regarding the Pierce Concert project. And when I went to him, he asked me, what's going on with the museum? I said, well, we got to come up with $100,000. He said, I got you. So he came up and he gave us the $125,000 that we needed. But we still need at this point, it's going to cost us about $80,000, I guess, or 80-something dollars to run and to keep it going.
Annually, every
annually,
year.
Yes, yes. So that's going to be,
and
you
that's
know,
not really a lot of money to run a museum.
It's not, because it's a small museum. You know,
And
it's
how many
small.
employees will you have there?
Well, right now we're going to start off very slow, Jean. You know, we're probably going to be open more or less on the weekend. But our
Okay.
main thing is going to be, we've had a wonderful collaboration with the school system. We've worked with them, you know, we called ourselves a virtue museum, but we had done film festivals. You came to one of our film
Yes.
festivals a couple of times, and we work a lot with the school system. So we do a lot of collaboration with the school system.
To educate the children.
To educate the children, exactly. So
About the history of the black men and women in
Yes.
Southampton,
Yes.
and also, I guess, to give them a sense of pride.
Absolutely, absolutely. The young people were amazing. I mean, these were 3rd and 4th graders that we did collaborate with at the time, and we would actually bring them over to the village hall. And we had, the teachers would have them write essays about a black inventor or a politician or whatever, and either they would write an essay or they'd do a drawing. And I would have an art display in the vestibule of the village hall. And so they would do a field day, and they'd come over, and their parents would come to, you know, see their children. We would go down to the boardroom. I would introduce the mayor, and he would give his little spiel, and they would do the whole program, these 3rd and 4th graders. Jean, it was amazing. But they talked about all the different people that they researched, you know. So I did that literally for about 10 years. We had that collaboration for almost 10 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. And now, the history of black men and women in the Hamptons. Can you give our viewers a little, in a few minutes?
Yeah, the one I want to make sure I mention, being we're talking about the Southampton African American Museum, is Emanuel Seymour. Like I said, they came, it was a great migration that came down from the north, from North Carolina and Virginia, and he came from North Carolina.
And what year was that about?
I would say, because the history I researched, the building was built, he built the building, mind you, in the 1940s. And we have had evidence of that when they were doing the renovation for the building. They were doing this dig, and we didn't have an archaeological dig, but during the renovation, they found all these different bottles. We found one bottle that was dated back to 1936. And then we found they hit the water main, and the water main from the Suffolk County Water Authority had to come to find the main. They couldn't find it, wasn't on the list, etc. But I have the original water main from there, and the gentleman from Suffolk County Water Authority said it's definitely from the 1940s.
Well, that's great. And what about going back even earlier? The history of black men and women in Southampton.
Well, a lot of the black men and women worked on the farm. Matter of fact, when they came from South, a lot of them lived on the farms where they worked. So a lot of them lived on the farms, and so they did gardening, they did farming, and a lot of the women did, you know, cleaning and doing the domestic work.
And were they free men and women, or were they in
slavery?
They
were, from what I understand at that point, they were free. But talking about Pierce Concert, which we mentioned earlier, born in the 1800s, he was a slave, but he was born technically. He was born free, but they enslaved him. He was 5 years old, and they sold him to a family to work on the farm. And for some reason, Jean, that does something to me to think about. He was taken away from his his mom
about it.
and working on a farm at 5 years old. I mean,
yes, one of the great crimes of this country was slavery.
Yes.
And we are a free country, but we have a history that's a very upsetting and a history where there is a lot of bad things happened to a lot of good people,
Yes,
notably people
absolutely.
of color.
But I have to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but
I have to say, you know, I like to give the good stuff too as well. In spite of him being enslaved and sold at 5 years old, he became a steerer and a whaler.
interesting.
Yes, and I mean, Pyrrhus, I don't know where my camera is, Concer. You have to Google this gentleman. He was just amazing and extraordinary man. He went on the whaling trip, and I'm going to give you the brief story because I want everybody to look him up. He came back, he started his own water ferry business. Right in Southampton, you know where Agawam Park is?
Yes.
In Agawam Lake, he had a ferry business that he had, taking people from the park over to the ocean to go, you know, to.
And what year was that about?
This was 18, yes, around 1840s. So that's what I'm saying. It's amazing. It's amazing, and that was his home there. 51 Pond Lane was his home. And, you know, I can't get into that story, but unfortunately, it was torn down.
And you document him in the museum, I assume.
Absolutely. And we're going to have 3 themes in the museum. We're going to have the Great Migration, we're going to have the history of the barbershops, and Pierce Concert. Because I want to talk quickly about the history of the barbershops, too, because that's where it was a gathering place. You know, back then it was, you know, the segregation.
For the men or for the men and the women?
For the men and the women. For the men and women.
Interesting.
But the interview I did with Randy Conquest right here in LTV was, and he explained how they talked a lot about the importance of voting, the importance of education. So it was a lot of great information shared within the walls of a barbershop. And of course, in the beauty parlor, they had a little gossip going on too. But my auntie was the beautician there. So when I was like 12 or 13 years old, I used to go there and answer the phones for her and write appointments down for her. And she taught us how to be a lady.
And there you are.
There I am. But so it was a lot of wonderful things that happened in spite of what was going on in the world.
Right. And how is your community dealing with this pandemic now? Have a lot of the black men and women, have they been affected badly here in Southampton because of the pandemic? Have a lot of people lost jobs? And what can all of us do? I know we have the Heart of the Hamptons food pantry that helps everyone who might not have a job right now, but what's going on exactly?
Well, you know, like I said, I actually was in St. Martin during this whole heavy time of the pandemic. But that was very heartbreaking for me because I was there in St. Martin and I heard at least 3 people that I knew who passed away from, you know, the virus. But from what I know now, there are people, my granddaughter, who went to FIT, believe it or not.
Congratulations.
She graduated and she got a great job, but she got furloughed at first and then she got laid off. So she's been affected. My daughter's been affected. So, you know, my daughter's working, she's a Zumba instructor, and now she's actually working in the Bronx dealing with taking the testing, the testing for the virus. So that's the job that she got, because, she didn't have a job. So
yes. Well, I think most Americans have been affected by this. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't been affected by the pandemic, but
right.
And not in a good way. I mean, we had at one point about 38 million Americans out of work, and this is a terrible thing. And now moving forward, I'm not sure where we stand exactly. We're afraid of this second wave coming on, and hopefully we'll get through this sooner than later, and that vaccine will be developed. And we have a few minutes left, and getting back to the museum, because I think it's so important that we show our support. And you have a website. What is the website, and how can people donate? Because I think it's very important that people get involved in donating. And every show I talk about how important it is. If you've got the money, for our viewers, if you've got the money, I believe you have an obligation to write a check or get on the website of a charity and donate. But if you don't have the money, you can always give your time and knowledge. But we have a good cause here. Money is needed. It's not a massive amount. I mean, somebody out here could just open up a checkbook and write that $85,000 check right now to help the Southampton African American Museum. But what is the website? And then is there a phone number that someone could call if they want to learn more and really get involved here?
The website is www.saammuseum.org. So it's SAAMUSEUM.org.
Say it once more from the beginning.
Okay, www.saammuseum.org. So SAM stands for Southampton African American Museum.
So if I were just to Google, and of course I've already Googled Southampton African American Museum, I'm assuming the website just comes up.
Yes,
correct?
and it comes up and you can donate. There's a part there you can donate.
Okay.
Or you can send your check to P.O. Box 2263, Southampton, New York, 11969. And all are welcome, all are welcome. Right now we're going to really need also funding. We want to put cameras in there. We need funding to do computers, to put computers inside because, like I said, we're going to be doing a lot of educational programs for people. And we're also going to do a lot of programs for our community. We have a woman on the board who works for the IRS, so we're going to do a lot of webinars about, how to, do what you had to do for the IRS. And we have a teacher that's there, that she's on the board. So we have a lot of things that we're going to definitely do with the community.
Brenda, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to that opening at the end of November 2020. I'm very excited for you and for really the entire eastern end of Long Island. And thank you again. And this concludes this Successful Philanthropy show. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.